The cold steel of the shackles bit into Era's wrists as she was dragged aboard the slave ship. Her heart pounded in her chest, eyes wide with disbelief. Sold by her family. A decision made in a dark room she had never entered for reasons she couldn't fathom. Her shimmering silver skin, a characteristic of her alien race known as the Kalari, glowed faintly under the ship's harsh lights. The ship hummed as it left the planet's atmosphere, and Era's thoughts raced just as fast. Why would her own family sell her? The betrayal cut deeper than the chains that bound her. She had been raised to believe in loyalty, unity, and the sacredness of family. Yet here she was, tossed into the cold abyss of space as if her life meant nothing. Era was led to a small, grimy cell along with others, aliens of different species, all sharing the same hopeless fate. The air was thick with despair. The soft murmurs of suffering filled the space around her, but she couldn't focus on the others. Her thoughts kept going back to her family, the faces she once trusted. The days blurred into each other as she was transported across the galaxy, her life reduced to nothing more than a bargaining chip. She attempted escape numerous times, but every effort was met with harsh punishment. Her once strong spirit began to crack under the relentless weight of failure. One night, as the ship coasted silently through the void, an explosion shook its very core. Era was jolted awake, the sounds of alarms ringing in her ears. The ship trembled violently, and in the confusion, she saw guards rushing in panic. But then, something unusual caught her eye. A shadow moved with calculated precision through the chaos. A man, human by the look of him, appeared from the smoke. His movements were sharp and deliberate, as if he had a plan mapped out in his mind. He approached her cage, his eyes locking with hers for a split second. His gaze held no fear, only cold calculation. "You want out?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Hera, momentarily stunned, could only nod. The man worked quickly, disabling the cage's lock with ease. As the door swung open, she hesitated, distrust tugging at her. This human was a stranger, yet the yearning for freedom overpowered her doubts. "I'm Hera," she said cautiously, stepping out. "Ian," the man replied, his tone clipped. "We don't have time. Follow me." They moved through the smoke-filled corridors of the ship, Ian leading her with practiced ease. His steps were purposeful, each motion betraying the experience of a man who had seen too many battles. Hera followed closely, her heart racing as they passed guards, cameras, and traps. She had no idea where they were heading, but for the first time in months she felt hope. The alarms grew louder, signaling that their absence hadn't gone unnoticed. Ian moved faster, his eyes scanning for threats. Hera marveled at his efficiency, though the weight of her questions pressed on her mind. Who was this man? And why was he risking his life for her? As they neared the escape pods, Ian cursed under his breath. "They know we're gone. We've got less than 2 minutes." Hera felt her stomach churn with fear. She could hear the pounding footsteps of guards approaching from behind. The corridor was narrowing, and their path to freedom seemed to grow dimmer with every second. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Ian spun, firing a blaster with deadly accuracy. The guard behind them dropped, and without missing a beat, Ian grabbed Hera's arm and pulled her toward the nearest escape pod. He punched in the launch codes with a practiced hand, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The door to the pod slid open with a hiss, and they tumbled inside just as another explosion rocked the ship. Hera was thrown against the wall as the pod jettisoned into space, the force of the blast pushing them far from the burning wreckage. For a moment, there was silence. The slave ship, once a symbol of her imprisonment, was now a flaming wreck, dissolving into the vastness of space. Hera watched it disappear through the viewport, her heart pounding in her chest. She had escaped, but at what cost? "What just happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ian's eyes narrowed as he stared at the flaming debris. "Someone blew up that ship, and whoever it was, they weren't after me. They were after you." Hera's heart sank. Me? Why would anyone target me? I don't know, Ian said, his tone cold. But I have a feeling you're more than just a slave. Whoever sold you, they knew what they were doing. Hera sat back in her seat, the weight of Ian's words settling over her. She had thought the betrayal of her family was the end of her story, but now she realized it was only the beginning. Someone had targeted her specifically, and the more she thought about it, the more she feared what that meant. Ian glanced at her, his expression unreadable. We need to lay low for a while. There's a planet not far from here, HFY. It's a backwater, off the grid. No one will find us there. Hera stared at the stars streaking past them, the vast emptiness of space stretching in every direction. She was free, but the danger wasn't over. In fact, it seemed like it had only just begun. As the escape pod traveled silently towards HFY, Hera couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Ian's calm demeanor did little to soothe her nerves. Whoever had destroyed the slave ship wouldn't stop until they found her. Why was she so valuable? And why had her family betrayed her? Ian, she said, breaking the silence, you seem to know a lot about this. Who do you think is after me? Ian's hands tightened on the pod's controls. Not sure yet, but whoever they are, they've got resources, and they'll be coming. Hera's pulse quickened. Why me? Ian glanced at her, his eyes hard. That's the question, isn't it? You're not just any slave. Someone wanted you out of the way. The weight of his words pressed down on her. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was running for her life. And Ian, the stranger who had saved her, was now her only hope of survival. The escape pod hummed as it altered course, the stars blurring into streaks of light. Hera's thoughts raced, but one thing was clear. She wasn't alone anymore. Ian had saved her, but whether she could trust him was another matter entirely. The barren surface of HFY loomed before them as the escape pod descended toward the planet. Its dull, rocky landscape stretched endlessly beneath them, punctuated only by jagged cliffs and deep ravines. The planet seemed desolate, untouched by civilization. A perfect hiding place, or so Ian had said. Hera sat in silence, her mind racing. She still didn't understand why she had been sold, why she was being hunted, or why Ian had chosen to help her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden jolt as the pod touched down with a thud, sending a cloud of dust swirling into the air. Ian unbuckled his harness and glanced out the small viewport, scanning the horizon. We're clear for now, but we can't stay out in the open. Hera followed him as he opened the hatch and stepped out into the arid, alien landscape. The air was dry, carrying a faint metallic scent, and the sky above was a dull gray, casting an eerie light over everything. It was the kind of place that swallowed hope whole, but Hera wasn't about to give up. As they trekked across the rocky terrain, Ian remained silent, his eyes constantly scanning for danger. Hera couldn't help but feel vulnerable. Here on this remote planet, far from any help, she was completely at the mercy of this mysterious human. And although Ian had saved her, she still had no idea who he really was. After several hours of walking, they reached the mouth of a cave nestled between two towering cliffs. Ian motioned for her to follow as he ducked inside, his hand instinctively resting on the blaster at his side. The cave provided some shelter from the harsh winds that swept across the planet, and Hera collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. "Why here?" Hera asked, looking around the cave's dark interior. "What makes you think they won't find us?" Ian crouched near the entrance, his expression unreadable. HFY is a dead zone. No communications, no tracking signals. It's off the radar of most civilized worlds. If they're looking for you, they won't think to search here. For now, we're safe. Hera wasn't convinced. For now. Ian turned to her, his eyes sharp. They will come. Whoever destroyed that ship wants you bad enough to burn every bridge to get you. We've bought time, but we're not in the clear. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Hera had been running from the reality of her situation, but now it was clear she was a target, and there was no escaping that. "I need answers," Hera said, her voice firm. "Why are they after me? What did my family do?" Ian hesitated for a moment before he spoke. "Your family sold you to someone powerful. Someone with enough influence to erase all traces of you. That means they saw you as more than just a daughter. They saw you as leverage." Leverage. The word hit Hera like a physical blow. Leverage for what? "I don't know yet," Ian admitted, "but I'm starting to think your family was involved in something bigger than you realize. Something that got you caught in the middle." Hera's heart sank. She had always believed her family was honorable, that they acted for the good of their people. But the more she learned, the more she realized how little she truly knew. Had they betrayed her to protect themselves, to align with some greater power? Ian's voice cut through her thoughts. "We'll figure it out. But first, we need to stay alive." The next few days on Zetaris 5 passed in tense silence. Ian scouted the area around the cave, setting up traps and makeshift defenses, while Hera tried to make sense of the nightmare her life had become. The desolation of the planet mirrored the void inside her, the questions that lingered without answers. One night, as they sat around a small fire in the cave, Hera finally broke the silence. "You said you weren't that different from me," she began, her voice low. "What did you mean?" Ian didn't look at her. Instead, he stared into the flickering flames, his jaw tight. "I wasn't born into this life. I was forced into it." Hera watched him closely, sensing the weight of his words. "You were a slave." "In a way," Ian replied, his voice bitter. "Not in the traditional sense, but my life was sold, just like yours. My people, my family, they were caught in a war they didn't start, and I became a pawn. Lost everything because of someone else's ambitions." Hera felt a pang of empathy. For the first time, she saw past the cold, calculating exterior Ian had built around himself. Beneath it was a man scared by loss and betrayal, much like her. "What happened to them?" she asked softly. Ian's eyes flickered with pain. "They died. I was too late to save them." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief. Hera didn't press further, knowing that Ian's wounds were still raw. Instead, she offered him something she hadn't expected to offer anyone. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For whatever it's worth, I know what it's like to lose everything." For a long moment, Ian said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he murmured, "Thanks." The next morning, Hera woke to the distant sound of engines roaring across the sky. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing as she rushed to the mouth of the cave. Ian was already there, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "They found us," he muttered, pulling his blaster from its holster. Hera's stomach dropped. "How? You said this planet was off the grid." Ian didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm and pulled her deeper into the cave, where they had stored a few supplies. "They must have tracked our escape pod. We didn't have time to disable the transponder." The sound of engines grew louder, closer. Hera's pulse quickened as fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. "What do we do?" "We fight," Ian said simply, handing her a blaster. "Stay behind me. Shoot only if you have to." Hera nodded, gripping the weapon tightly. The idea of fighting terrified her, but there was no other choice. If they were captured, she knew what awaited her, slavery or worse. As they moved toward the entrance of the cave, Ian's eyes darted to the sky. 3 small ships hovered above the cliffs, their sleek, black forms silhouetted against the gray sky. "They're sending drones," Ian said, his voice tense. "Fast and lethal." Hera's hands trembled as she raised the blaster. The drones zipped through the air, circling the cliffs like vultures waiting for their prey. Ian fired first, hitting one of the drones with deadly accuracy. It exploded in a ball of fire, but the others closed in, their weapons locking onto their position. "Move," Ian shouted, pulling Era behind a rock as a barrage of blaster fire rained down on them. Era's heart pounded in her chest as she returned fire, her shots going wide. The drones were too fast, too agile. Panic clawed at her, but she forced herself to focus. Ian was counting on her. With a sharp breath, she aimed carefully and fired. The blaster shot struck the core of the second drone, sending it spiraling to the ground in a fiery crash. But there was no time to celebrate. The third drone swooped in, its weapons charging. Era's eyes widened in terror as it fired directly at them. Ian grabbed her and dove behind a rock just as the blaster bolt exploded against the cave wall, sending debris flying. They were running out of time. The debris settled around them as the remaining drone circled, relentless in its pursuit. Era's pulse raced, and she glanced at Ian, who was calculating their next move with grim determination. They couldn't hold out much longer. Before either of them could react, a sharp whine filled the air, and a streak of energy shot through the sky. The final drone exploded in a dazzling burst of light, raining metal shards across the cliffs. Era gasped, her blaster still raised, unsure of what had just happened. Ian's eyes narrowed, scanning the sky. That wasn't us. Era turned, confused. Then, whoa. Her question was answered by the arrival of a sleek, black ship descending rapidly toward them. Its design was unlike any she had seen before, smooth, angular, and built for speed. It hovered just above the rocky ground, and the ramp extended with a hiss of hydraulics. From the shadows of the ship, a figure emerged, draped in a long, dark cloak. The figure's face was obscured, but there was something familiar in the way they moved, a deliberate grace that sent a shiver down Era's spine. Ian tensed, his blaster trained on the newcomer. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward, lifting the hood of the cloak to reveal the face beneath. Era's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, her features sharp and striking, with dark eyes that held a depth of knowledge and danger. Her hair was cut short, slicked back, and streaked with silver despite her youthful appearance. "My name is Valera," the woman said, her voice calm and commanding. "I'm here for Era." Era's heart skipped. "Me? How do you?" Valera's gaze flicked to her, and Era could feel the weight of it, as if the woman could see into her very soul. "I've been watching you for some time, Era. You're more important than you realize." Ian's grip tightened on his blaster, his expression unreadable. "If you're another bounty hunter, you're not taking her." Valera shook her head slowly. "I'm not here to collect a bounty. I'm here to protect her." Hera's mind whirled with confusion. She didn't know who this woman was or what her true intentions were. But something about Valera's presence made her feel safe, or at least safer than she had felt in weeks. "Why?" Era asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you protect me?" Valera's eyes softened, though her tone remained firm. "Because the people hunting you are not just after you. They want what you represent." "And what's that?" Ian asked, still not lowering his weapon. "Legacy," Valera said, her gaze never leaving Era. "You carry something within you, something your family didn't understand. The ones after you, those who destroyed the ship, who sent the drones, they believe you are the key to unlocking a power that has been hidden for centuries." Hera felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was too much, too big. She had thought her family had sold her for political leverage, but this, a hidden power. Legacy. It made no sense. "None of this makes sense," she muttered, shaking her head. "I don't have any power. I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Valera interrupted, stepping closer. "You were born into a line of guardians, protectors of knowledge long forgotten by most of the galaxy. Your family, in their greed, lost sight of what they were meant to protect. But you still have a chance." Hera's mouth went dry. "A chance to do what?" Valera's gaze turned serious. "A chance to stop the ones hunting you. If they succeed in finding what they're after, They will gain control of an ancient force, a force that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. And it starts with you. Hera's head spun. She looked at Ian, who remained silent, his expression hard to read. Part of her wanted to believe Valera, but part of her still clung to the disbelief, the refusal to accept that she could be at the center of something so monumental. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. Valera's eyes met hers, unwavering. "You don't. But staying here will only get you killed. I can help you unlock the truth about who you are and why they want you, but you have to come with me." Hera hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to stay put, to not trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. But then she thought about the drones, the burning ships, the life she had known that was now nothing but ashes. She had nowhere else to go. Ian stepped forward, his eyes locked on Valera. "If she goes, I go." Valera raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "Very well, but know this. Once you step onto my ship, there's no turning back. We will be hunted, and we will have to fight, but together, we stand a chance." Hera swallowed hard, her heart pounding. The cave that had been their sanctuary now felt like a prison. She glanced at Ian, who gave her a small nod, his silent way of saying he would follow her lead. Taking a deep breath, Hera stepped forward, her decision made. "Let's go." Valera turned, her cloak billowing behind her as she led them up the ramp and into the ship. As the hatch sealed behind them and the engines whirred to life, Hera couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a threshold, one that would change everything. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel since this nightmare began. Hope. Inside the sleek confines of Valera's ship, Hera sat quietly in the co-pilot seat, watching as the barren landscape of Zateris 5 shrank away beneath them. The ship soared through the planet's atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space, leaving the desolation behind. Valera piloted the ship with steady hands, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Ian stood behind them, arms crossed, his gaze sweeping over the control panels and the unfamiliar technology. Hera felt a strange sense of calm despite everything that had happened. She glanced at Valera, her mind filled with questions, but one burned brighter than the others. "What now?" Valera didn't answer right away, her gaze still locked on the starry expanse. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice quiet yet resolute. "Now, we head to the outer rim," she said. "There's someone there who can help us. Someone who knows the full extent of what's at stake." Hera frowned. "And what exactly is at stake? You keep talking about this power, this legacy, but you haven't told me what it is. What am I supposed to do?" Valera's expression remained unreadable as she adjusted the ship's course. "It's not something I can explain easily. You need to see it for yourself." Hera's frustration flared. She had been yanked from one life-threatening situation to another, and now she was being told there were even greater dangers ahead. "I deserve answers. Why do these people want me? What is this power you keep mentioning?" Valera sighed, her hands gripping the controls a little tighter. "You carry something within you, Hera. It's an ancient force, older than any civilization you've heard of. Your family was supposed to protect it, but instead, they betrayed their duty by selling you into slavery. They thought they could remove the threat by giving you away, but all they did was paint a target on your back." Hera's chest tightened. The weight of Valera's words felt crushing. "But why me? Why does this power matter so much?" Valera glanced at her, her dark eyes softening slightly. "Because whoever controls that power controls the balance of the galaxy. The ones hunting you believe that if they can unlock it, they can use it to reshape the galaxy in their image. They'll stop at nothing to get it." Hera's thoughts spiraled. She had gone from being an outcast, sold by her own family, to being at the center of a cosmic power struggle. It was too much to take in. She looked over at Ian, who was standing silently behind them, watching everything unfold with a guarded expression. He had risked his life for her multiple times now, but she wondered if even he could grasp the full extent of what they were facing. "And what if I don't want to be part of this?" Era asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I just want to disappear?" Valera shook her head. "You can't disappear, Era. They'll find you, no matter where you go. Your only choice is to fight." Hera leaned back in her seat, staring at the endless stretch of stars before them. She had always been a survivor, but this was different. This was a war she didn't understand, with stakes higher than she could have imagined. Ian stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "If we're going to fight, we need to know who we're up against. Who are these people hunting her?" Valera's lips pressed into a thin line. "They're part of an ancient order. They call themselves the Remnants. For centuries, they've sought to control the power Era carries. They believe it will give them the ability to reshape the galaxy according to their will. They've wiped out entire civilizations in their pursuit of it." Era's stomach churned. "And now, they're coming for me." Valera nodded. "Yes, but we have an advantage. They don't know you're fully aware of what's inside you yet. They're expecting to find a frightened girl who has no idea what she's capable of." Hera swallowed hard. "But I don't know what I'm capable of." Valera smiled faintly. "You will. When the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do." Hera wasn't sure if Valera's words were meant to comfort her, but they only deepened the pit of anxiety in her stomach. How was she supposed to wield the power she didn't even understand? And what if she couldn't? Suddenly, the ship's console beeped, and Valera's expression darkened as she scanned the readings. "We've got company," Valera said, her voice tight. Ian stepped forward, glancing at the screen. "Who is it?" Valera's fingers flew across the controls. "It's them. The Remnants." Era's heart pounded in her chest as Valera accelerated the ship, the stars blurring around them as they sped through space. "How did they find us so quickly?" "They've got hunters spread across this quadrant," Valera replied, her voice calm but urgent. "They were bound to pick up our trail eventually, but we're not defenseless." She flipped a series of switches, and the ship's weapon systems powered up with a low hum. Hera's pulse quickened as she saw the blips of enemy ships closing in on their position. "Get ready," Valera said, her eyes narrowing. "This is going to get rough." Hera gripped the sides of her seat as the ship jolted to the side, dodging an incoming blast from the pursuing ships. Ian braced himself against the wall, his jaw clenched. "I'll man the guns," Ian said, moving toward the weapons console. Valera nodded, not taking her eyes off the controls. "We'll need all the firepower we can get." As Ian activated the ship's defense systems, Era could hear the thrum of energy building up in the ship's cannons. The tension in the air was palpable, and Era's mind raced. She had never been in a real space battle before. This was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The first blast rocked the ship, sending a shudder through the hull. Era winced, gripping her seat tighter as Valera deftly maneuvered them through the oncoming fire. "They're closing in," Ian shouted from the weapons console. He fired off a volley of shots, hitting one of the enemy ships, but two more took its place. "We need to jump," Era shouted, her heart hammering in her chest. "We're too close to their gravity well." Valera yelled back, "We won't make it." Era's stomach twisted as the enemy ships continued to close the distance. The Remnants were relentless, their ships fast and deadly. Every instinct told her they were running out of time. Suddenly, Valera's gaze flickered toward the navigation panel, her eyes narrowing. "There's a nearby asteroid field. If we can make it there, we might be able to lose them." Hera's pulse quickened. "That sounds like a death trap." Valera gave her a grim smile. "Only if you're not a good pilot." With a flick of her wrist, Valera sent the ship careening toward the asteroid field. The enemy ships followed, hot on their trail. As the massive rocks loomed ahead, Era held her breath, bracing for impact as Valera weaved through the jagged asteroids with terrifying precision. Behind them, the enemy ships struggled to keep up, their blasts narrowly missing as they dodged the floating debris. Ian fired off another round, taking out a ship just before it collided with a massive asteroid. "We're almost there," Valera shouted, her hands moving swiftly across the controls. Hera's heart pounded as the ship skimmed past a massive asteroid, its surface so close she could almost feel the pull of its gravity. With a final burst of speed, they shot out of the field, leaving the pursuing ships trapped in the chaos behind them. Hera exhaled, her chest heaving with adrenaline. For now, they had escaped, but she knew this was only the beginning. The ship steadied as Valera pulled them out of the asteroid field, the swirling chaos of rock and debris left behind. The immediate danger was gone, but the atmosphere inside the ship was thick with tension. Hera's breath was still heavy, her fingers trembling as they loosened from the armrests. "We lost them," Ian said, checking the scanners. "For now." Hera could barely hear him over the racing of her own thoughts. Her mind replayed Valera's words, an ancient power, a legacy she didn't understand. Everything felt surreal. She had no choice but to confront this strange reality, one she never asked for. Valera exhaled, settling back into the pilot's chair. "We bought ourselves some time, but we can't stay off the radar for long. The remnants will find us again." Hera swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do I stop them? You said I had some kind of power, but I don't feel anything. I don't know how to use it." Valera turned toward her, her expression softened by understanding. "That's because it's still dormant. Your power has been suppressed, locked away, but it's been stirring ever since the remnants began hunting you." "Do I unlock it?" Hera asked, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her. Valera hesitated. "There's a place in the Outer Rim, a sanctuary. It's ancient, hidden, and sacred to those who know of it. If you go there, you might be able to awaken your power fully, but it's not without risks." Hera's heart pounded in her chest. She had been pulled from one uncertain situation to another, but now it felt like the entire galaxy was balanced on a knife's edge, and she was standing at its center. Yin stepped forward, his face determined. "We don't have any other choice, Hera. We're in this fight now, whether we like it or not. If you don't take control of this power, they will." Hera nodded slowly. Fear coursed through her veins, but beneath it, something else stirred. A glimmer of strength, of purpose. "Let's go to the Outer Rim." Valera punched in the new coordinates, and the ship leaped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into long lines of light. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady reminder of the journey ahead. As they sped through the void, Hera stared out into the endless stretch of space. Questions churned in her mind, but one stood out above the rest. Who was she meant to become? Hours later, the ship emerged from hyperspace into a remote corner of the galaxy. The Outer Rim was vast, wild, and untamed. Floating amidst the distant stars was a planet shrouded in swirling clouds, its surface hidden beneath a veil of mist and mystery. "That's it," Valera said quietly. "The sanctuary." Hera leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat as they approached. The planet looked ancient, untouched by time. It felt like a place where the fabric of the galaxy had been woven together, where the forces that shaped the universe still lingered. As they descended into the planet's atmosphere, the mists parted to reveal towering mountains and dense forests below. The landscape was beautiful but foreboding, as if the very air was charged with untold power. Valera guided the ship toward a hidden valley, where the remnants of an ancient temple stood. The structure was carved into the mountainside, its stone pillars worn by time, but still standing tall, testament to its enduring significance. "We're here," Valera said as the ship touched down gently. Hera stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. Ian moved to her side, his expression unreadable, but Hera could see the concern in his eyes. She wasn't alone in this, but she knew the path ahead was one only she could walk. "Stay close," Valera warned as they exited the ship. The air was cool, filled with the scent of earth and stone. As they approached the temple, Hera felt a strange pull, as if something deep within the ancient structure was calling to her. The closer they got, the stronger the sensation became. "This place was built long before our time," Valera said, her voice hushed with reverence. "It's connected to the source of your power, to the force that runs through you." Hera paused at the entrance, staring up at the massive stone archway. The carvings on the walls depicted scenes of ancient battles, of figures wielding a power that seemed to come from within the very earth itself. "Go inside," Valera said softly. "You must awaken your power. No one else can help you now." Hera took a deep breath and stepped into the temple. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, she felt it, a surge of energy coursing through her veins. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, as if the very ground beneath her was alive, connected to her somehow. The chamber ahead was bathed in a soft, ethereal light. At its center stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a glowing orb of light, pulsating with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. Hera approached slowly, her entire body vibrating with the energy of the place. The orb seemed to call to her, its light growing brighter as she neared. When she reached the pedestal, she hesitated for only a moment before reaching out. The moment her fingers touched the orb, a blinding light filled the room, and Hera felt a surge of power unlike anything she had ever imagined. Her mind exploded with visions of galaxies being born, of civilizations rising and falling, of an ancient force that connected everything in the universe. She saw herself, standing at the center of it all, a conduit for that power. Suddenly, the visions shifted, and she saw the remnants. An army, led by a figure shrouded in darkness. They were coming for her, their eyes burning with hatred and greed. But something had changed. Hera was no longer afraid. As the light faded and the vision subsided, Hera stood alone in the chamber, her hand still resting on the orb. But she felt different now, stronger, more complete. The power that had been locked away for so long was now hers, fully awakened. When she stepped back outside, Valera and Ian were waiting, their eyes filled with anticipation. Hera met their gazes, her voice steady and filled with newfound resolve. "It's time to end this." The journey back to space felt different. Hera was no longer the same girl who had been swept up in a galaxy-spanning war. She was now a wielder of an ancient power, fully aware of the role she had to play. The fear that had once gripped her was replaced with a sense of purpose. The galaxy needed balance, and she was the key. As Valera's ship soared through the stars, Hera stood by the viewport, watching the darkness beyond. The remnants would come for her, but this time, she wouldn't be running. This time, she would face them. Ian approached, his gaze searching her face. "Are you ready?" Hera turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly with the power inside her. She nodded, more than ever. And as they set their course for the final confrontation, Hera knew that no matter what came next, she was no longer a pawn in the game. She was the one holding the pieces, and the fate of the galaxy was in her hands.